I'm working on trying
interested
to
in
get it.
seeing how they see each other.
Yeah.
Your major point is that secrecy, the importance is in the contents that are important in form. But how you can reconcile with this insight is that actually every individual case, content is most significant. And for an industry or a sector, content is very important. So how are you going to reconcile these two?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the emphasis was a little bit wrong in this particular presentation. I think part of the idea that I wanted to talk about is because we think of patents in terms of the technology. I think it's the obvious aspect is the content. The thing that strikes you first is the content. So I think in this it's kind of a little bit way way. So I'm kind of trying to use that as the starting point, and then saying, well, actually also the fact that it's exclusive, the form of the secret. So one of the things that I'm getting from anthropology of secrecy is that we can look at form itself as something that's important also. And so it's not so much saying that the content is not important, it's emphasizing that there's another aspect to a patent. I'm being attacked. And that other aspect of the patent is actually in some senses more important in structuring relationships. And so within a company, for instance, it's the idea that there are trade secrets that actually structures who can talk to who. So the fact that the intellectual property department is separate from, say the tax or the accounting department. Accounting people can't enter the IP part or the R&D part. These are restricted areas, and the restriction is, of course, because of the content, but it's the restriction itself that helps to provide us some sort of hierarchy in that socially. I don't know, did I answer?
I think so, because you are talking about the internal different hierarchical question. That's an entirely different. I mean, we're talking about the power within the company. But
right.
I'm talking about how this insight can reconcile with actually the content is the most important. Why we have so many litigations. There are so many. Why the intellectual property becomes such a dominant paradigm right now.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you're right. I was answering more about structuring hierarchies within the companies. If you look between companies, of course, it's not the fact that there's a secret or the fact that there's a patent that makes one company better than another. It's the fact that they can then use that content of that knowledge to produce products that then more people buy. So I think you're exactly right. I think what I would add to that, though, is that by focusing just on contents, we focus too much on innovation as part of patents. And the other part of it, even between companies, is the fact of exclusivity. So that exclusivity is very important, and that has to do with relative advantage between companies. And so this is I think a relative advantage has a lot to do, of course it's the technology that's the relative advantage, but it's relative. So it means that I have it and you don't. And that, I think, is a question of form. So it's the fact, it's not necessarily the content, it's the content. I have X content, you have X plus 1. What is X doesn't matter so much. It's the fact that I have plus 1. And that gives me a step-up advantage. So I think what I'm emphasizing is not that the content doesn't matter, because it does, and that's part of what I want to be looking at. But it's to emphasize that there is another aspect there that's important for us as social sciences to be looking at and to be understanding. And that's that focusing on competition part.
Thank you very much. I enjoy very much your talk. I have a very naive question. That is that in your case, you deal more with a particular type of IP. That is the things that the commercial companies or manufacturing companies owns. How about other types of, I would like to hear your comments or a little bit of comparison with these types of IP with another type, such as the indigenous people's intellectual property rights, that kind of thing. So I think that these two things are somewhat different by the nature of, of their contents or the way that they work. So although you focus on a particular type, but I know that you're an expert in this area, so I would like to hear your comments on how this would affect the newer indigenous intellectual property rights.
Yeah, I haven't done any research on cultural property itself, on cultural heritage stuff. I've done reading on it, so I guess I can answer a little bit from that perspective. I think part of what this project is about is trying to gather more data that would allow us to deconstruct or take down the IP umbrella. So take down the idea of intellectual property as anything, and instead talk about each subsection as their own thing. And I think that's very important, and it's important because cultural property is very, very different from even copyright, which is in some ways what it's modeled after. So cultural property is in a sense, it's a hybrid of sorts between copyright and patents. And it's a hybrid because patents give much stronger protection, meaning if you don't know it, you're still infringing it. And I think that's the kind of strength of protection that cultural property efforts are trying to get. So it doesn't matter if you didn't know that this mark, that this picture was an Australian Aboriginal picture, because you got it from somewhere else. But I could still prevent you from using it. So that's the idea of that. It's to control circulation even once it's already gotten out there. And that's something that patents can do, but copyrights can't as well. It's more like copyright in the content that it's protecting. It's protecting music and movies, or protecting from use in music and movies and songs. And those are typically thought of much more in terms of copyright. The biggest difference, though, for cultural property is that it's supposed to be eternal. I mean, there's no time limit on it. The whole idea of it is that these are songs and stories that are traditional. They've been here for a very long time. They're not traditional in an anthropological sense, where we talk of newly invented traditions. This is the idea of the law, is that it's protecting things that have been here forever, and there's no author. And copyright doesn't protect anything that has no author. It protects things because they have an author, and the author, copyright protection actually lasts for 70 years after the death of the author. In the US, 50 years after the death of the author. So that's a very big difference between cultural property and copyright. And those are the most similar of the two. So I think, going back to the idea of like three-part property issue, I think one of the ways that you can start to see the differences between patents, trademarks, and copyright, and cultural property, and rights over biodiversity or biological DNA or whatnot, is by taking each part as important. I think if you just focus on the rights, which is what legal scholars and laws actually do, they focus a lot on the rights themselves and say, well, the rights to cultural property are roughly the same as copyright, and so therefore the effect is going to be roughly the same as well. The problem is if you look at the object itself, they're quite different. And this is a communal tradition rather than an individual person's creation, or an individual person, even an individual person building on others' creation. So yeah, we can talk about this more some other time, I think. But that's kind of, I guess, where I am on that. I think ultimately, I think the idea is to split it up and to really understand each thing as a separate thing, and not just say because they all happen to be intangible somehow that they all are the same.
因为时间的关系如果大家还有其他的问题，可以留下来跟他继续讨论。那我们今天非常谢谢魏仲然先生给我们的演讲。那我们希望他接下来的田野可以很顺利，遇到很多恩主的联系。